but that's closer to like the historical society and
that was a good
those
step.
kinds of organizations hard. But like how to implement that.
Welcome. Well, here she is, Donnamarie Emmert, Abingdon's Haint Mistress.
Woo!
You're famous.
Whatever. Okay.
Famous, fun, and friend.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Always.
I'll take that.
Yep.
All right. So, what do you want to know?
I said start with like an introduction about yourself, however you want to do that. Like
Okay.
where you're coming from, what Haint Mistress means.
Do you all know what a Haint is? Raise your hands. Surely, now surely you know what a Haint is. I want you to explain it. Oh, well, in that case, a Haint is an Appalachian term for a ghost. And it's not just any ghost, because if you got ghosts at your house, it's really not that big a deal. But if you got a Haint, you got a problem, because a Haint is a ghost with a really, really bad attitude. And when I was being raised, my great-grandmother over in Poor Valley, today they call it Bromley Gap, but over in Poor Valley, used to talk about Haints, and it would scare the bejeebers out of me when I was a kid. She would talk about Haints and the lungeons. Two things you always wanted to avoid.
Keep it on.
So, anyway, but that's what a Haint is. So, especially if you go to Martha, Washington, and you look at that beautiful blue paint that is painted underneath the porch, that is Haint blue. There's a couple of different shades of it, but Haint blue keeps the Haints out of your house. Now, if you've already got ghosts in your house, I don't know what to do about that, but that keeps it out. It keeps the flies off the porch, too. So that's what a Haint is. All right. How did
I
I?
have a question over here.
Yes.
Actually, it's not a question.
Yes.
It's just one that I read in the big blue because I can't suppose it needs to be with the sky and the water and it's supposed to be
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I figured they just kind of bumped into it off the steps.
All right.
Well, you know, they've
They've
been
been up
there.
pissed off there.
Yeah, they've been there and they've done that, so they're just focused on other things, I guess. I don't know. One of these days, I guess I'll find out. Do any of y'all believe in ghosts?
Yeah. I want to. Yeah.
You don't?
I want to. I don't know.
Well,
I love stories.
well, okay. You know, it's really funny. We always talk about ghosts, and there's so many people who are like, oh, no such thing. Oh, that's nonsense. But there's too many stories from too many different people. It's not just circumstantial. You know, it's too much over the years, things have seen, especially from kids, because kids don't have a filter. You know, kids, you get to that point, most of us do, that, you know, when you start talking about your imaginary friend, or you start talking about seeing your great-grandmother up in the attic or whatever, and the adults look at you like, what? And that's when you get the clue, oh, I shouldn't talk about that. But some of us never get that clue. I kind of got that clue, but stuff just happens to me. So I do believe in ghosts. I do. In fact, I will start with my first personal ghost story. I didn't need to do this first, but I will. The year was 1979. Which for me just wasn't that long ago, but it was. And I was in the theater department at Junior Highlands Community College. And I got a phone call from the Barber Theater. Oh, can you run sound? Yeah, sure, I can run the sound. I knew buckets about running sound, okay? Because back then there was this thing called a tape recorder, and you punched a button, and you recorded things, and then you punched another button, and it went off. That's what I knew about running sound. At Barter, even back then, things were a little more complicated. Now, back then, what would happen, today the theater season runs smoother. Things transition, there's not a big transition period from season to season. Back then there was. And the summer people were leaving for other jobs, and they hired me, and I had 3 days to learn my job. And I knew zero. And they very quickly realized that they had hired a total fool, But hey, man, I was in there because I was at Barter Theater. Woohoo! So I go in and I very quickly realize I am way over my head. But they had no time and nobody else to hire, so they kept me. Bless their hearts. So, anyway, I am in there, and the first show that I worked on at Barter was Dames at Sea. And if you are familiar with that show, it is very sound intensive, and people are depending on sound cues from the sound person. Not one time did I ever get my sound cues right. Not once. And I had the headset on, and the stage manager at the time was Champ Leary. And I would hear Champ saying in my headset phone, sound, sound, sound. And I'm up there doing this because I have no idea what I'm doing. Well, it was not the best production of Dames at Sea, as you might well imagine. But one day I had this brilliant idea that I came up to Champ before the show started and I said, Champ, what do you think about this? When the play is over, I'll stay and practice. She thought that was the most brilliant thing she'd ever heard come out of my mouth. And she said, oh, for God's sakes, please, stay as long as you can. But you're going to be alone. I was like, well, okay. She said, no, nobody else is going to be in here. I'm like, not a problem. She said, nobody will be in this building. And of course, the clues are flying over my head, and I have no idea. And I said, sure, that's fine. She said, all right then, stay, but here's your instructions. Now, I have to keep in mind, the sound booth and the light booth were upstairs in the room behind the balcony. That's the same room is still there. That's got this big, two-way mirror. Basically, we can see out. We can get sound. We can get sight cues from the stage. Not that they did me any good, but we could see down there. But that's where we were. She said, all right. She said, practice as long and as much as you possibly can. When you are done, you stand up. You turn out the light in the booth. You come out. You pull the door shut. It's a self-locker. It's a no-brainer. Then you come down the stairs. When you do, you cannot get out through the front doors. They're going to be chained shut. You have to go out to the theater. When you do, you go up on the stage and you put out the night light. The night light in theater, folks, is called a ghost light. It's always been called ghost light. I had no idea why, but I soon found out. Put the ghost light out in the middle of the stage. Then you go down the stairs through the catacombs. That was our nicknames for the dressing rooms because, yes, they were, and as far as I'm concerned, still are, that creepy. Then out the door onto Actors Alley. You got it? Yeah, I figured that out. So that night, after I ruined yet one more production of Dames at Sea, everybody left, and I was in the theater by myself. Folks, I was 20 years old and an idiot. Do you think I practiced much? No. Maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes. I had a fairly advanced sound system at my fingertips. I made, the pretty chandeliers that are in there inside the theater? I made them shake. Yeah, it was great, man. Things were rocking in there, and I was playing with the sound and having myself all kinds of fun, making a huge racket. And I did that for a little while, and I actually went through my sound tapes a little bit, and I felt better about myself and what I was doing. And I was like, okay, I'm done with this. So, stood up, remembered my instructions, turned out the light. Now, remember, I can see down to the theater. There's this real kind of pale blue light down there. It wasn't creepy or weird. It was kind of like just emergency grade lighting. However, when I came out of that sound booth and I pulled that door shut and I heard it click, those little hairs started up the back of my neck. And if you've ever felt this before, something's looking at you. You're not alone. I was so convinced I was in that building with somebody else. The women's restroom was upstairs at the time. I actually went into the restroom and looked underneath the stalls looking for feet because I knew somebody was in there. There was nobody. Still, those little hairs were telling me otherwise. I don't know what you all do when you're alone and you're afraid, but I know what I do. I give myself the big girl speech. It goes like this. Ha! I'm a big girl. I'm not scared of nothing. Now, seriously, I do. Because I figure this. If somebody's in there and hears me, they're going to think I'm crazy. And they're going to run away. And then if nobody is in there, I've not lost anything, not even my dignity. So I'm giving myself the big girl speech, and I'm swinging down the stairs, with my arms doing this. And then I decide I'm going to try to whistle. Because if you can whistle, it shows you are really cool. The only thing that was coming out was hot air. I was terrified. But I'm keeping it together. And I get to the bottom of the steps, and I beeline it for those doors. But guess what? Chained shut. So I had to go into the theater. Now, if I could have gotten back in the sound booth upstairs, I would have done it. But this was my only option. So into Barter Theater I went, stage right. And when I got to that back row, those little hairs on the back of my neck went ring. I bet I looked like a cockatiel. And I'm looking into that pale blue light, and I say, is there anybody in here? And nobody said a word. So I creeped down about 2 or 3 more rows, and I happened to look up in the balcony, and that's where I saw him. Crouched up in the corner between the wall and the ceiling, and he's up there in that corner like a big white spider. And I look at him, and he looks at me, and that's when he flew down on me. And I use the pronoun he very loosely, because from about here up, it looked like a dude, but from here down, he had that kind of tail like, Casper, only this was not a particularly friendly ghost. At that point, I lost all composure, screamed like a girl, and ran. Now, at that time, the big box seats were on either side of the stage at Barter. I don't remember taking the steps. I think I became airborne for a brief time. And the next thing, though, that I do remember is I was plastered behind the proscenium in that theater going, oh, my God, what was that? Now, if you've ever had this experience, you're trying to make it better in your head, okay? Trying to make sense of it. And then it hit me. Okay, work with me here. Okay, I was a fool at my job, right? I really was. And people didn't like me because I was such an idiot. And I always screwed things up. So, theater people are crafty. Theater people are very smart. They may have only known that I was going to be there from, they maybe only found out maybe 10 or 15 minutes beforehand. They had put together some sort of trick for me. And I knew if I could get out on that stage with enough light, I was going to see a piece of fishing line, at least, with a sheet tied to it. Right? But I had no light. What was I going to do? Then I saw the night light. And I still can't believe I had the foresight to do this. I grabbed that ghost light, flicked it on, and jumped out onto the stage of Barter Theater, swinging that thing up toward the balcony, okay? My debut on the Barter stage. And I'm poking the light up toward that corner, thinking, okay, it's going to be up there. Nothing. I'm taking the light, shining it over the seats, thinking, okay, there's going to be a sheet drop down there or something. Nothing. Poking the light toward the orchestra pit, thinking, okay, there's a projector down there. They've done something really clever. There's nothing. Take the light, put it down, look back out, second row. There he stood, as solid could be, though completely white. And he had his arms crossed, as if to say, ha, 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 gotcha. No, he didn't. Again, I screamed like a girl, and I ran. I don't know if you've ever been backstage at Barter, but that set of stairs is straight up and down. How I did not fall and break my neck, I will never know. I flew down those steps. I took the corner. I was beating feet through the catacombs. I was making good time till I hit that back door. And I mean, I hit it because I thought the door was an outie. No, my friends, it's an innie.
Oh, God.
Whang! I mean, I hit it. Thank God I'm padded. Hit my face, hit everything else, bounced back, knocked the wind out of me. I finally struggled up, grabbed the door, got out. When I was in the alley, I was in tears. I had hurt myself, and I was scared out of my mind. And then I thought about what I had seen inside that theater, and I began to run. And at that time, I lived up on Circle Drive. I ran nearly the entire way home, and that's uphill, folks. Now, when I got to work the next day, and I did go back, I did not say a word to the people I worked with, because then I knew they would fire me for being an idiot. And I needed this job. So I continued on. Thank God the next show I was much better at my job. But I can guarantee you this, I never stayed late. So when the season was over, I ended up moving. I was out of town for a decade at least. And then when I moved back to Abingdon, I got to know the folks at Barter again. Well, don't you know, everybody was talking about the Ghosts of Barter Theater. Oh, yeah, there's a bunch of them in there. Not that anybody ever mentioned anything to me 10 years before. But, oh, yeah, there's all kind of ghosts at Barter. You know, there's the ghost of Bob Porterfield. There's the one that they call the jerk, the one who likes to torment the technicians. I don't know who mine was. I didn't ask for identification. But I will tell you this. I know what I saw. So, if ever you see me at Barter Theater, and you will, when I'm going in, I am a happy person because I know I'm going to go see some good theater. But when that play is over, get the hell out of my way. I will never be the last person left in that theater. You can bank on that. So that's my first get-go with ghosts. And you wonder why the Haint Mistress. So.
Well, hey, tell us a little bit about your first experiences in Abingdon. You told me you grew up out in the county, so.
I was a county kid. I was never a town kid. And let me tell you, there is such a thing as a class difference. I grew up at the outskirts of the county. I was a lake kid. And actually, I was kind of a latecomer into Washington County because I grew up in Sullivan County. My grandfather was the principal at Weaver's Elementary. So I got spoiled real early because I was the principal's grandkid. So first grade I was at Cold Springs. 2 years I was at Weaver's. And then by the time I made fourth grade, I went over to Cleveland. And it was completely different because at Weaver's we had linoleum on the floors and we had televisions in the classroom. That's how we learned math. Coming out of Sneedville, Tennessee on public TV, we would have our little half-hour lessons, and that was pretty cool. We didn't have those amenities over at Cleveland. Not even close.
Tell folks where Cleveland is. Because it may not be familiar to everybody.
Yeah, Cleveland Elementary doesn't exist anymore.
Even the building doesn't?
No, the big building does not. There's the little classrooms are down at the bottom of the hill. It's in the Cleveland community. It's about a mile, 2 miles from the lake. That's about as good as I can. It's in Washington. It's in Washington County. Yeah.
Cleveland Road. There's a community center at Cleveland.
Yeah, that's
I
what
went to Cleveland.
Did you?
This one, Mr. Piner.
I had Preston Brown was my principal.
He was a seventh grade teacher when I was there.
Okay. Yeah, he was a very good principal.
But it's essentially between Watauga Road and Old Jonesboro.
Yes.
And Old Jonesboro.
Yeah.
So it's tucked in the knobs there, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the best thing about Cleveland was that we had a great library. We had a great library, and my librarian's name was Jeannie Rose Dameron. She was a marvelous woman. She had that special ability of finding us kids who liked to read, and she treated us like grown-ups, and she would recommend books to us. Oh, yeah, we'd have book clubs, and it was marvelous to be treated like that. So, when I ended up leaving Cleveland, went to Abingdon High School. It was 1972, and back then we did not. First of all, we didn't have kindergarten, and we sure didn't have middle school. So I was an 8th grade county kid thrown in with senior town kids. Yeah, that's a big span between 12 years old and 18 years old. I was very fortunate. I was very fortunate because to me it was a whole brave new world, and there were all these people, and there were all these things to do, and there was these different clubs and these different classes. I was in the first Latin class that was ever taught, Beth Pless, and it was exciting. And by the time that I was a sophomore, that was my world. I found out later that a great number of my classmates did not have the same good experience I did, because we were always tagged as county kids, and that we were definitely lesser than, and that stank. Did that happen to you too?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't talk about that very much, but yeah, it was a tough sell. But I had a pretty good run of it, because like I said, there were all these different things to get into, and I was like, woo! And I was able to jump from group to group to group because there were different groups. There was the theater groups, and there was the athletes. There were the book folks. There was all these different things to do, and it was just, I got to sample. And other folks didn't get to experience that, and I'm very sad for that. But got out of Abingdon High School barely. If I have one regret in life, it is that I did not drop my senior year. I really wish I had dropped my senior year. I didn't know it at the time, but it was, Virginia Highlands had been open for about, I don't think 10 years yet. So it was still, it was a whole new world up there for community college. I didn't realize that I could have skipped my senior year and actually gone to the community college and transferred my credits back, because my senior year was a disaster. Yeah, by the time I was a junior, I'd done everything. I was president of this, or I'd participated in that. And senior year, I was bored out of my mind. Absolutely bored out of my mind. So, I really wish I could have done that. In fact, I'm lucky I graduated. Very lucky I graduated. So, graduated in 77. And I don't know about those of you who grew up here in the county or in the town, but by the time I was 18 years old, my God, there was no place more boring in the world than Abingdon, Virginia. Ugh. Ooh, there's nothing to do. There's no place to go. There's no clubs. There's no dancing. There's no this. There's no that. And I was right. For somebody 18 years old, there wasn't a lot. And when I did finally move, it was a move when I was 20 to Johnson City. Yeah, to go to ETSU. Whoa, where I promptly flunked out. Do you know how hard it is to flunk out of Johnson City? I mean, ETSU at that time would take anybody. And I promptly dropped my GPA neatly in half, because once again, I was like, what am I doing here? So I just, it was the luck of the draw, and I got dared, and I moved to San Francisco for 10 years.
Perfect timing.
San Francisco wasn't boring. It really was. Yeah, I moved to San Francisco in December of 1980. So, anyway, so that's a little bit about what my very checkered academic past.
Well, you went back to ETSU then, right?
I did, actually, yeah.
One reason why you're here today, and actually one reason why I knew you, and way
Yes.
back when I moved.
Yeah, I did. Basically, I spent 10 years in San Francisco. I did move back here for a short time, then moved back to San Francisco. Then it suddenly just dawned on me that it was time to finish college. I was kind of ready, finally. And I moved back, and I actually finished at Virginia Highlands, which finishing for me has never been a great strong point. And then I went ahead and basically transferred to Emory and Henry College. Let's put it to you this way. I had been at Virginia Highlands so long. When I graduated from Emory and Henry, I had enough for 3 majors and a minor. And I took full advantage of that too. So when I was done at Emory, I was like, okay, what to do next? And I heard about this little program down at ETSU in storytelling. Did you know you can get your degree in storytelling? At the time, it was the only school in the United States that had that degree. And I thought, well, doesn't that sound key? I think I need to do that. And I finished that program in 18 months. And I cooked gas. And it was one of the best things I have ever done in my life. One thing I noted, though, is so many of the people that I was in class with, good people, nice people, a lot of teachers, which I was not at the time. I ended up in these classes, and we all talked about, all these different things that, where we learned our first stories. And folks would be, I learned stories from my great-grandfather who had come over from Poland. Or I learned these jack tales from
in the middle of the
someplace else. And I thought, I have no idea. We weren't storytellers in my family.
Well, I guess you can come on in. See upstairs.
And as it turned out, I started thinking about it real hard. I was like, what was the very first story I remember hearing when I was a kid? I was like, let's go back. It's like, 3 Little Bears. I have a storybook. Princess and the Pea. I still have my storybook with that in it. It's like, they're all from books. And then it hit me. The very first story I remember hearing when I was a little kid. Every Sunday, just about, my mother and I my first memory of Abingdon was going through it. Because again, I was a county kid. We lived out on Highway 75. We would drive through Abingdon on our way over to, as I said earlier, Poor Valley. I don't know where this Ferrari gas stuff came from. That's very highfalutin for me. It's all still Poor Valley. But my great-grandmother lived over there. And Sundays were the days that all the women got together at my great-grandmother's house. Now, my great-grandmother did not have a phone, but her daughter, who lived way up the hill from her, did, but they didn't use it much because it cost money. And you didn't want to make a long-distance call. And, we were still in town, but still those phones were kind of new. But we knew every Sunday we could be at my great-grandmother's house. So we would go. So I'm probably 4 years old. And all the women are sitting around in my great-grandmother's front parlor, which was also her bedroom. And she had this great big coal-burning stove. And the thing looked like a big black tombstone. And the man would have put out the heat. My great-grandmother's house was always hot because it was either that stove and the kitchen stove always had a fire in it. Well, I would be sitting on the floor playing with my dolls, or if I got really lucky, I'd be playing with the button drawer out of her old-fashioned sewing machine. And all the women would be talking. I didn't care about that stuff. That was just nonsense. until one day I heard her start this story. Hello. There was a man over here in the valley who had the worst luck with wives. He kept marrying them, and they kept dying on him. He was off on wife number 4 when she up and died. And we'd never thought too much about it except this time. This time it was different. He was going to bury her the very next day. Now back then you didn't do that because it was up to the family to come in and to wash the body and to dress it in the best set of clothes that you had. And then you'd stretch that body out on a plank between 2 chairs or even on the dining room table. And people would sit up with it during the night to get the spirit out, to get your soul out. But he wasn't going to do that. No, he was going to bury her the very next day. Well, that morning, things were real tight over here in the valley. And it was like this message just kind of went out. All the men and boys did their chores, and then they got on the path that led up out of the valley and went up, up, up over the top of the ridge and dropped over into Moccasin Gap, where the Primitive Baptist Church was. And then a little while later, all the women and the girls and the smaller children finished up things in the house, and they got together, and then they too were on that trail that went up, 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 and then over the ridge to church. Now, that little church was so small, and it was down toward the end of May, and even with all the windows open and the doors open, there wasn't a breeze one moving. Now me, I was just a slip of a girl, and I was standing at the very back door, and I could see everything. Now the men were all lined up against the wall. Whew, you could tell they were just hot. And the women were sitting in the pews, and they were fanning themselves, and the children were squirming because, oh my goodness. And the preacher was up front just preaching away. And then there was that man sitting in a chair next to the coffin that had his recent wife in it. And then I watched him. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, and he took out a handkerchief, and he daubed the sweat off of his wife's off of his forehead. And then he looked over in that coffin, and he took that same handkerchief, and he wiped the sweat off of his wife's forehead. And I've always wondered, do dead people sweat? I sure hope they do, because they buried that woman that day. That's the first story I ever remember hearing as a child. And people wonder why I'm weird as hell. So that's a true Washington County story.
That's awesome. Not heard that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Can we take a little break?
Sure.
It's about 1:40-ish.
Okay.
All right, folks, let's take like a 5-10 minute break. Get yourself another cider, hit the bathrooms. If you got questions, start generating those. Get them ready. We can ask questions to Donnamarie, and she'll continue telling some more stories here. All right, we're going to get started back
One
up.
opinion, I'll give you one.
Before Donnamarie starts up with her thing, Kathy Hagee over here is going to tell us a little bit about Fairview. She's got a flyer, so if you're interested in more of these historic sites around Abingdon.
Hi, my name is Kathy Hagee, and there are several Fairview members here, family, and some are volunteers. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. This coming September 27th, we're going to be having our Living History Weekend. And what that will be, we'll have Camp Life, we'll have the Civil War reenactors. They'll be doing dismounted cavalry, mounted cavalry, cannon stations, camp surgeons. We're going to have quilting, candle making. Hopefully we'll have the herbs, medicinal uses, spinning and looms, flax, cooking of the brine. And then also we have an 1812 cabin that is time period decorated. The cabin was built by our 5th great grandfather. Jacob Hagee back in the late 1790s. So it's a very special place to us. We do have tours. It's not open all the time. You just call for a tour. But then we also have events there to help promote educating life lived back in the 1800s. We are open for sponsors. Anybody that would like to join us and help us. We do need guides for the Living History Weekend. It should be a lot of fun and education. And if you've got any questions, just let us know.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep, sure. The Old Glade Tractor was it Old Antique? Try to get it right.
Okay.
Old Antique Tractor Association, Old Glade Antique Tractor Association?
There you go.
Okay, there I got it.
They're along with us.
Yeah, they're based there too, and they've got some amazing old machinery, and they do all kinds of neat programs through the year, especially with school groups. I help out with that sometimes. So. All right, well, let's get back to Donnamarie. I don't have any more prompts.
Oh, nice.
Okay. What are you keen on talking about next? Or does anyone have a question before we get started? Get the ball rolling?
How'd you come up with the tours, the Haint Mistress tours?
Well, I had, going back to being in the storytelling department at ETSU, and I had told you the story that got me started on, my particular slant. I came out of it and I was going in storytelling. I was going to classrooms and I was going to libraries and doing all these things. And one day, Rick Humphreys came up to me, and most of you all know Rick, and he had this little set of index cards. And he said, he said, my daughter and I got together, this past year, and we did a tour for the Historical Society. And he said it was just, a little free thing for folks to come out. He said, I was amazed at how many people showed up. And he said, we just told, little things about town and told some ghost stories. And he said, the turnout was amazing. He said, we're not ever going to do it again. And then he handed me this set of cards and he said, do you think you could do something with this? And that was how I got started. It was great. And with that set of note cards, I used to go to all the businesses and some people's houses, and I would just stick my head in the door and say, hey, y'all got any ghosts? Because people expected that out of me. And they'd say, oh, now, Donnamarie, we don't believe in ghosts. But, and then they would tell me these great big hairy stories. And I'm like, thank you very much. And when I originally started my tours, I would start at the Martha Washington, because everybody knows where the Martha Washington, at that time, was the inn. And I did not tell the stories about the inside of the Martha, because the Martha had its own master storyteller, a fellow by the name of Pete Sheffey. And one of the true regrets in my life is that I never heard Pete tell his stories. Because by the time I got interested in telling ghost stories, I knew he had the Martha pretty well covered. So I left everything to the inside to him, and then everything to the outside was mine. But when I originally started, we started the Martha, I would walk and talk all the way down to the tavern, turn, come back down Main Street, end up at Barter, and that would take 50 minutes. And I would do two, sometimes 3 tours a night. I was considerably younger and more svelte back then. And I also charged $5 a pop. So I was a pretty popular lady back then. Not that I'm not.
What year was that? When approximately?
Approximately. Okay, I'm glad you said that. I think it was 90. It was either 96 or 97. I think it was 97. So I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. And I don't walk that far anymore. Trust me. I start at Wolf Hills Coffee, and we take a little dog leg and go down to the tavern, then come back up, and then down Main Street to Pecan, and back up, and I'm done. But it's still an hour and a half tour. There's no such thing as a 50-minute tour with me anymore. Not on a bet. But the great thing about it when I started these tours is that, I had my note cards. I had the stuff that I had gotten from people firsthand. But what would happen is at the end of the evening, there would generally be a clump of people, primarily women, waiting for me after the tours. And they would always start with, now I don't believe in ghosts, but because back then you didn't talk about ghosts, because if you did, you were nuts. And your husband would put you away for being crazy. But I was a safe place. So they would tell me these wonderful stories. And I'm like, oh God, my memory was better back then. I'm like, oh, I'm going to write this down. It was great stuff. And a lot of it was about Main Street. A lot was Main Street and out in the county. And it was just, I was like, that's the reason that my tour grew from being 50 minutes long to, at one time, it was 3 hours long.
I remember 2 hours. A couple of times I went, it was 2 hours, and
Yeah.
My mom passed away 5 years ago, but she went with us maybe 15 years ago, and every time she was coming to Abingdon, she's like, "Well, can we go visit Donnamarie? Can we?" You were like the main thing she remembered. We went on your Haint Mistress tour, and she thought that was the bee's knees.
Are there any stories that are not on your tour that you would love to share?
Sure. In fact, I'll tell you a Martha story, since I don't do this end of town anymore. And everybody always likes Martha stories. The hotel does not tell their stories now. They don't tell their stories now because they don't want that reputation. I, of course, have no problem with it. But I won't tell the story about the inside of the Martha. I will tell you a story about something that I saw, in a manner of speaking. Some years ago, I went out to get my morning paper, and my neighbor Mike was there at his fence. And anytime Mike showed up at the fence, I was always real excited because I knew Mike had a story for me, because Mike had a ghost. And his ghost was a woman, and she liked to wreck his back porch. And she knew all sorts of crazy things. And, again, it was one of those deals that he really couldn't tell us to everybody, but he knew I was a captive audience. So I'm like, okay, Mike's there, new story. But it was something different this time. He said, if you got some time today, he said, come down to work. He used to work at Jack Rabbit Printing. And he said, come down to work. He said, there's going to be a woman in there who's got some stuff that you're going to be interested in. I was like what? He said, nope, you got to come down and see. I'm like, okay, fine. Love a challenge, and I had the time, so I ended up going down to Jack Rabbit, and sure enough, I went in, and there's this woman at the front counter, and the counter was pretty long, and there were all these papers spread out across it. And I was like, ooh. So I just went up, hey, what you got? She's nothing. And I was like, well, two can play this silly game. So I just walked around the counter. I knew she couldn't get me back there. Well, this woman had been to a local private auction, and she had bought some really remarkable pieces of Abingdon memorabilia. And it was a couple of old deeds, some of the original penny postcards of Abingdon, and the ones printed on linen. Great stuff. And then she had a series of photographs. And they weren't regular black and white 5x10s or, any of that. They were weird shaped. They were long and wide and whatever. And I'm looking at this photograph, and it was the front of the Martha Washington, back when it was a new school. And it was a great picture. It was done those pretty sepia tones. And it was the building, the trees were really small back then, and it was a snow scene. So the snow was coming off the eaves of the building. It was a really, really pretty picture. I was just really taken with it. And you could see through the front gate had been taken. Apparently the photographer had been standing in the middle of the street and took the picture. I was like, okay, that's great. Well, about that time, Mike comes from the back workroom. He said, oh, I thought you'd find that picture. Have you seen them yet? I went, seen what yet? He said, who's in the picture? I said, Mike, the only thing I see in this picture is an old building with a bunch of snow. He said, no. He said, just look at it. He said, more down, right at the street. He said, don't stare at it. Let it just kind of come to you. Okay. whatever. So I'm standing there holding this picture and I'm looking at it but not staring at it. And I swear to you, the weirdest thing happened. It just seemed like these two images just rose up out of this picture. And the next thing I knew, I was looking at two men. It was two Civil War soldiers. And they both had on those Johnny Reb slouch hats. And they both had on the tight-fitting military uniforms and the cross belt, munition belts. They were both right-handed. They were carrying their rifles. But from here down, there was nothing.
I've seen it.
Have you seen that
It's
picture?
yeah, you showed it on when you were doing tours at one time.
It really was pretty amazing. So I'm looking in, I'm looking in the snow thinking, okay, I want to see footprints in the snow. There's nothing. And I thought, cool. This is a really great piece of trick photography. It wasn't trick photography because down in the corner there was a name. I think G.N. Wirtz. Wirtz. And Wirtz was the original photographer here in Abingdon. And when he first moved here, his first photography studio was said to be in a boxcar down on the railroad tracks. And he was the one taking pictures of all the young men going off to fight in the war. These were often the only photographs that these boys had. And I was looking at an original Wirtz photograph. Only it wasn't from 1865. This picture was taken about, I think it was about 1906. So this was not trick photography. This was not Photoshop. This wasn't some sort of double exposure. What was in that picture was in that picture. And I'm sure that Wirtz had no idea that the day he took that snowy shot from the middle of Main Street, Abingdon, that he was capturing a piece of history that he had already witnessed some,
And the
30
parts
years
you can
before.
see is solid as everybody sitting in here. And the rest of it, there's nothing. It's like,
It's
You know,
snow
green
and you
screen or
can see
whatever.
through them and to the hedge. And it's pretty amazing.
and it was very old because there's iron gates. They were huge iron gates. You know, the big
Martha
fancy
Washington
ones.
Girls College.
They probably lost that when the iron was being donated for World War One.
Could be. So that's my Martha story. I always tell folks when you're walking down Main Street, be careful, because you just never know who you're going to bump into. Seriously. And of course, now, those of you who've been on my tour, you've heard me tell this story. This is probably my favorite story that I tell, and it needs to be recorded forever. So, you're here for it. And it ends up being another Martha story. In the 1850s, Abingdon was a very prosperous town. Very, very prosperous. I mean, we'd had several things that had happened. Number one, the train had come through town. A big, big deal. Also, according to the 1860 census here in Washington County, we had 100 water wheels. 50 of them were for grinding grain. The other 50 were for sawmills. That's a lot of stuff going on in this county. I mean, we're large, but come on. We had a major wagon manufacturer, Haint wagons, some of the best wagons made in America. A couple of them still exist, and they are exquisite. We had the Rose Cabinet Company on Main Street, made beautiful furniture. By 1861, we had two institutions of higher learning. We had the William King Male Academy, which was said to be on par with the Citadel. You know, it may have been hyperbole, but still, that's pretty good. And then we had the newly opened Martha Washington Girls College. Now, ladies, they thought we were smart enough to learn science. We actually had a science lab in that place. They taught us math. They gave classes in rhetoric. It was amazing. It was amazing. Well, oh, by the way, Martha Washington never set foot on that campus until maybe recently. If she had, she'd have scared the hell out of us because she'd already been dead for 60 years, I think, at that point. It was named the Martha Washington Girls College because we were in Washington County, named for her husband, and some fine Southern gentleman, as the story goes, said, we've named something for the husband, now we need to name something for the lady. And that's how I got that name. Well, 1861, the Civil War breaks out. I was very foolish, and I thought for the longest time, I hoped for the longest time, that this county split in half. No. It was more 95% Confederacy, 3% federal, and the other 2% were like undecided. Very pro-Confederate. And when the war broke out, most of those young men went off to fight. We, however, because we're located down here in the toe of Virginia, we were still in pretty good shape. However, we had a couple of things going against us. Number one, that train came through. Also, we're only about, 15 miles from Saltville, which at that time had field offices for every one of the southern states to make sure that they got their monthly salt allotment. Saltville was a huge deal. So, still though, we managed to make it through pretty well until we got to 1864. And at that time, we were no longer prosperous. We were pitiful. That spring, there were very few farmers left in the area to plant crops. That fall, there was no furlough granted for farmers to come home and harvest, so there went that. That summer, there had been 2 epidemics that had swept through town. One was typhoid, and the other was yellow fever. And by the end of the summer, the very weak, very old, and the very young were all dead. And just when we thought it couldn't possibly get any worse, we get to December of 1864, when there is a Union troop movement called Stoneman's Raid that marched through town. Now, I have read numbers from anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 men who marched through this area. I don't know what to believe. I just know it was a lot of people. Now, what had happened I think it was on September the 1st, on the eve of setting fire to Atlanta, Sherman had sent a telegram to Abraham Lincoln saying, don't you think we need to do this to Abingdon? He didn't mean Abingdon, Pennsylvania. He meant us. That raised the hair on my arms the first time I read it. So I was like, yeah, we were that important. So it happened because that's what Stoneman's Raid did. They came through Kingsport, burned it, came through Goodson, burned it. Goodson today, of course, is Bristol. Then they were making their way to us, but when they got to us, they were a little kinder. And I'm still not exactly sure why. I was thinking, well, maybe Christmas spirit, but I'm not so sure about that. Wartime. I did, however, I was told that a number of the officers had family in the area and they didn't want to burn their homes down. Then I read that as Stoneman's Raid was moving into town, they were met by a group of concerned citizens with a signed petition asking them to please stay. You have to keep in mind, we have virtually no men left here. And when you have no men, you got no law. So bad things were happening out in the county. Things like robberies, arsons, there'd been a murder. And we would have preferred to have been occupied than to have been ignored. But Stoneman's men said, thanks, but no thanks. We've got other things to do. And they began to set fire to the town. But they were very specific in what they burned down. They took out the train depot. Across the street was Hurt's grocery store. Hurt's had been supplying the Confederacy. Burned them out. Okay, worked their way down Main Street, where the Methodist Church is today. That used to be a rather large livery stable. The man had been supplying fresh horses to the Confederacy. Union troops came in, took what they wanted, burned him out of business. They burned the newspaper office, the telegraph office, the jail, some buildings that had been used for barracks, and then they were out of town. Now, if you had been living in Abingdon at that time, that night you were not going to sleep. You'd have been a little anxious because you would have had no idea what was going to happen next. And that's the reason there were so many people out in the street that night on Main Street who did witness what happened next. At about midnight, one Union soldier rode up to the front of the old courthouse. He threw his reins down to a slave who was standing there in the street, dismounted, went up the steps of the courthouse, kicked open the doors, and the next thing we knew, our courthouse was on fire. And then that fella came out with a torch in his hand. Now, you may have noticed up on Courthouse Hill, on the side where the tavern is, everything looks pretty similar in age, but on the other side, there's a lot of different architecture. Well, the reason for that is that fellow with that torch zigzagged across Main Street for about a block and a half. And he set fire to every business and every building standing there. And then he walked back up Main, got on his horse, and instead of riding away, he sat and watched, quite delighted with himself. Well, folks got close enough to him that they could see him. They recognized him. He was from Abingdon. His name was James Wyatt. And the last time he'd been in that courthouse, things had not gone his way. He'd gotten into some sort of legal dispute with a local businessman by the name of Noble McGinnis. Ain't that a fun name? Noble McGinnis. Well, Wyatt swore he was innocent, but the court found in favor of McGinnis. It probably didn't hurt that McGinnis was also a deputy clerk there too. But Wyatt then swore he was going to leave this town and he was never coming back. Well, he got it part right. He did leave. When the war broke out, he joined the Union troops, and he became part of Stoneman's raid. Trust me, when he marched into town, nobody was asking him to stay. Nobody was asking him for help. That kind of tore the scab off of all those old feelings. So he took his chance at revenge. Of course he burned that courthouse. He had found no justice there. And all those businesses and all those buildings, guess who they belonged to? McGinnis. He was perfect. It was revenge at its best. However, his undoing was he sat there and he watched. There was a band of Confederate soldiers on the next rise over. They saw the new flames in the Abingdon night sky, and they rode into town. Now, if you'd been a little further down the street, about where the Methodist Church sits today, you would have seen James Wyatt riding hell-bent for leather right down the middle of Main Street with 4 men behind him shooting at him, and the entire hillside was ablaze. None of those bullets hit him until he reined his horse to the left to make good his escape up Church Street. And as he did, one of those mini balls got him right in the spine. And as his horse topped the hill, he came out of the saddle, and the horse continued on. And it's that horse that continues on to this very day. People have said that when they've been sitting on the front porch of the Martha Washington in broad daylight, a horse just comes out of nowhere, dashes the drive in front of them, and then disappears. Others have said that when they've spent the night there, they've had a room on the back, they've looked out the windows, and they cannot for the life of them figure out why there's a horse in full tack down that little meadow that's down next to the railroad tracks. Well, if they ask me, I could tell them. It's the ghost horse of the Martha Washington or the ghost horse of Barter Green. It's all the same horse. Now, this is Abingdon's probably its best known ghost story, and it is true. Now, I've told this story forever, and I love it because generally when there's Abingdon kids on the tour, they'll come up to me later and they say, "I've seen that horse." I'm like, "I bet you have." And I'm so tickled. But one night, pretty early on, there was a young, very serious woman came up to me and she said, "You know that story is true, don't you?" I said, "Sweetie," I said, "come on." I said, "It's a story." I said, "It's a great story. It's a good story." I said, "It's just a story." She said, "No." She said, "You don't understand." She said, "My husband is on the police force in this town. And he answered a 911 call from a very upset motorist on Main Street, Abingdon. Will someone please come catch this crazy horse that's running loose in the middle of Main Street?" Well, he pulled up in front of the Martha, got out of his car, and what did he see standing there? A horse. They looked at each other. The horse then turned, ran up on Barter Green, and disappeared. How can I argue with that? So I always tell folks, when you are walking down the streets, day or night, if you hear a clip clop behind you, it may not be from a carriage ride.
My family has lived in a three-story building across from the Methodist church 3 times.
Oh, did
I have
Mistress,
seen the horse
Virginia.
have you?
right there in Church Street, like what I call a barn pit,
Yep,
standing on the bank, no riding.
that would be the horse.
And my dad tried to tell Chief Christians that they need to catch the horse.
That horse never got caught.
So I have seen the horse,
You've seen the horse.
and he looks like a real horse. It's no ghost to
Confirmation. Wow.
it. Yeah, Miss White owned that house across from Methodist Church. We lived on the 2nd floor,
Okay,
and it was supposed to have ghosts in it too.
it does. It does.
I've heard noises, but I never saw the ghosts.
And you
But I
didn't
have
go looking
seen-
for him.
No.
Yeah.
But I have seen the horse.
Voila. There you go. How do you argue with that? So that's my best known ghost story and another little piece of Abingdon lore. Thank you, sir. Yay! Awesome. Wow.
Wow, that's cool. Anybody else keen to share a story or ask a question?
Anything else you want to know or that I can make up for you?
What's your thought of animals sensing spirits?
Oh yeah.
I do too.
Yeah, definitely.
We're
Yeah.
all animals.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Absolutely.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
that's not ghost related?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm just always curious about the kind of social memory and history. And since you grew up in Cleveland, or in the Cleveland area, I know 75 is where there's a commemorative motor route for the Over Mountain Men who went out that way to Kings Mountain. That's the state road that they designate that they took. But I always heard from Blair Keller that they came through the Knobs and then through Cleveland. And I was wondering, since you grew up there, is that a story that you've heard growing up? Because I know this hasn't always been in our history books.
Right.
And I'm just curious, since you were a young person there.
No,
you
that
grew
was
up
not
hearing
ever
stories.
part of our purview. It just wasn't. No, and plus I had come in. I don't know if you guys have ever done this yourself, but when you started grade school, when you started in first grade or whatever, did you go all the way through or did you move in? Did your family move and then you ended up in a class? Because I was one of those people. I was the outsider because I came in 4th grade. Ooh. So no, any of that was not part of. Wish it had been though.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know a thing about that one.
So you had this experience in the Barter Pier with this
Mhm.
ghost, right? Do you have any other ghost stories that you experienced yourself?
That was the big one. I don't go. People ask. It's so funny because people ask me to go look for ghosts with them, and I'm like, no. Why would I do that? But I've ended up in some strange situations before, and I've seen things that weren't there. And yet, you know, even with what I do, I'm not necessarily a doubting Thomas anymore, but it kind of makes me a little nervous. Cause it's just like, you know, I mean, my reality is probably a little different from a lot of other people's, but it's still pretty much, you know, on the rails. But when you see things, I had visited some friends of mine who got an old family farmhouse, and this is over in Grayson County. And they told me about, you know, they thought their, you know, grandfather or great grandfather was in the house. And we're sitting outside, and it was getting toward dusk, and I just happened to look through the window and got a perfect view into the front parlor, and something just moves across and didn't look like a person, but it was a person, and went into the kitchen. And I just halted the conversation, there went your granddad. And everybody froze. And they're like, you saw him? I'm like, well, yeah, it's kind of hard not to. And then I realized not everybody does that. So, you know, it's just little things, but like I said, I don't go hunting anybody. I don't go looking for anybody.
Means they're looking for you.
Okay. I used to work at the Fields Penthouse here in town, and I love that house. And I still love that house. But we had Letitia. I think it was the daughter Letitia. She was one of the Penn sisters, who was residing upstairs in one of the front bedrooms. And there were stories about her. The first story I'd ever heard was that it was the house had been closed for a long time, and when it used to snow, the snow plows for town used to gather in the municipal parking lot, so they could go out from there and, you know, go scrape and salt and do whatever. And somebody looked up in the bedroom window and saw a woman sitting there. Who's in the house? And keys were located, and they went in the house and looked and looked and looked, and there was nobody there. It was Letitia. And as far as I know, Letitia is now gone, because some folks came in and did a little move along thing, and she did not want to go. She did not want to go, but she ain't there now. That room you could go into, and I mean, people, and I wouldn't tell, I mean, as folks are coming in to visit Abingdon, I'm not going to say, hey, go up and see her haunted room, woo! None of that, because I'm just like, you know, it's just a nice bedroom. Inevitably, someone would come downstairs and say, who's in the front bedroom? And I'm like, it's her. I was like, well, what'd you see? You know, there's a woman in there. And that room was always at least 15 to 20 degrees colder than the rest of the house. Always. But yeah, just little things like that. But like I said, I don't go looking. Don't come looking for me. Thanks, Dave. I'm gonna go to bed with that thought in my head.
Oh, but they're good ghosts. I mean, you know, they know they can come and talk with you.
Yeah.
They'll be fine.
Oh, just to let you know, I know after this talking about ghosts and all of this today, and I know everybody's all, you know, grown up and strong, but tonight when you go to bed, you're going to start thinking about some of the things I've told you today. And if you get scared, you take your shoes that you've worn today and you park them toe first under your bed, and it keeps the ghosts away. I don't know why it works. Generally, I think it's because your feet stink. But it works. That's all I know. I had a very nice, very grandmotherly storyteller lady tell me that woman could tell the best ghost stories. I mean, she was so sweet, and she'd tell stories that would lift the hair off your head. But she always told her folks that. So if it was good enough for her to tell them, I share that information with you all. So that's all I got, unless you got questions.
So the kids who thought that there were monsters under their bed, that if they had put their shoes under there, they might not have had it.
I would think so, yeah.
Or trapped them.
Yeah, oh, that's true. Paint them paint blue.
I've got a question. If you're willing to share, like after going to San Francisco for 10 years and then coming back to Abingdon,
Yeah.
because you had had this idea there was nothing to do here when you left. What was your impression of Abingdon? How did you see it when you came back with, you know,
And
I
why
got
did
years
you
later.
go back?
Well, it was one of those things of, quite honestly, it was like having a vision. It just hit me one day. It was time to come home. It's time to come home and finish school. Because I mean, I goofed off a lot. Like I said, I ended up with 3 majors. I had a lot of college credits. So it was just time. But so far as coming back, yeah, of course I was back in school. And so there was lots to do there, and there was a whole different crowd of folks to do and through. And plus, I'd done a lot in San Francisco. I had done a lot and lived a lot, and it was just time to, I'm not going to say necessarily grow up, because that's, no, but attitude changed.
Was
Definitely.
school after the first or second San Francisco?
Now say it again.
Was school before
Second.
second? It was
Second.
after the second?
Yeah.
'Cause
I
you
met
came
you
back
in-
and then went back.
Right, because I met you the first time.
No, you met me before that.
Well, yeah.
We did our first show when you came back.
Yes.
The first time.
Yes.
And I was like, you weren't here long enough to go to school, so I was confused there for a second. I was like, hey,
No,
the second time.
between the first and that first time I was back in school.
Because I almost ran with you the second.
So, anyway, that's my story. Thank you all for coming out. Remember me in October. Yay!
Thank you.
You're welcome. This was fun.
Yeah.